Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. My 14-year-old internet boyfriend became my stalker. Story by u/receptionplayful5158. I think I should start this off by saying that I'm not a great storyteller, so I'm sorry for that in advance. Also, I'm from the UK and he lived in another country, and I've never met him until this incident. So I met Tom through this app called Geeking. I won't lie, that place was a breeding ground for pedophiles and just in general awful human beings, and of course, 13-year-old me was using the app daily. I started talking to him about his mental issues and the classic dynamic of a young girl who just wants to help this older boy who she has a crush on, so then becomes his therapist. What I learned over the years of being his emotional support victim was that Tom was 2 years older than me. He had an abusive upbringing with many mental health issues because of it that he struggled with. Our heavily toxic, verbally abusive relationship was very on and off for over 2 years, till I put an end to it in the summer of 2019 after he threatened to do something awful to me. I blocked him on everything and I moved on with my life. Winter 2019, I'm working in a cafe and still living in the deep country with my parents. I'm hardly posting on social media when I suddenly get a message. It's from an unknown Instagram account. And I really wish that I had screenshotted the first message, but it pretty much went like, "Hey, it's Tom. We haven't spoken in a while, but I'm going to a concert this weekend and I thought about you." The place he mentioned was a city nearest to me. I texted back to be nice, just saying that I'm doing well, but ended it with him and I would rather not stay friends. He says he's comfortable with this and the conversation ends. It's 2 days after and I'm working my 5-hour shift in the cafe. I come in through the back door like I always do, and I see a pile of what I think are old clothes at the edge of the window. I don't think anything of it. I do my shift and grab my stuff and leave the door. I walk down the street still feeling completely safe until I'm grabbed by my bag, and the 6'2" man, who I vaguely recognize, is smiling down at me. He says my name and another huge wave of fear kicks in as I immediately recognize his voice. It's Tom. I don't even give him the time of day to speak. I just shook him off and started power walking down the street towards a shop where I knew my dad was. Looking back, I kind of think that I should have just ran straight back to my work. But as a 16-year-old who had never been in a confrontational or any terrifying situation before, I just ran straight to a parent. Tom then follows me, shouting my name, and I manage to lose him and reach my dad. After that, I got a message from the Instagram account saying that he was sorry, but that he was in love with me and that he needed to have me, which still to this day makes me sick to think about it. He also mentioned that he thought it was romantic that he traveled all this way. I blocked that account and later made a new one. I also contacted my work about it, and that's where my boss checked the security cameras outside and told me that he had been sitting there since 8 a.m. and I started working at 10. He was the pile of clothes outside. I blamed myself for a really long time and shrugged it off as not that of a big deal. However, the more he got in contact with me after, the more petrified I felt, and I'm now in therapy. I have received text messages from him, messages that say that he's changed, he's sorry, he's a Christian now, And the latest one is that he had a terminal illness and needs to see me one last time. Since changing my number and email, I've not heard from him. I've only been told by others that going to the police might make me feel less safe as they can't do anything now as it's over the internet. I am back to feeling safe now, which is great, but to Tom, let's never meet again.
This happened back in November. I'd just gotten off work and decided I wanted to go and see my sister and her kids. We sat in her bedroom and we talked for a while. It started getting late and I live about 40 minutes away, so I decided to head home. As soon as I walked out of her bedroom, I got a feeling that somebody was watching me. I'm not the type of person to get scared easily, but by the time I got to her front door, I didn't even want to go outside. I stood there for a minute and finally opened the door and ran to my car, immediately jumping in and locking the doors. I tried to convince myself that it was just dark and I somehow spooked myself. I started driving. I got about 10 minutes down the road. The whole time, it felt like somebody else was with me. My stomach was turning, and I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. I decided to pull over and text both of my sisters, telling them where I was, what was going on, and how long I had until I made it home, and then continued on with my drive. By the time I finally made it home, I was physically shaking. It felt like pure evil was surrounding me. I sat in my car, trying to work up the nerve to go inside. When I could finally open the door, I ran, full speed down the driveway and all the way up the stairs, immediately locking the door behind me. It felt like something out of a horror movie. I went straight to the bathroom to splash water in my face and try to calm down. My dog started barking. I froze. He never barks unless something is there. He stopped barking after about 15 seconds. I wanted to go wake my dad up, but when the dog calmed down, I told myself that he'd probably just seen an animal and everything was fine. I didn't want to bother my dad because he wakes up at 3 a.m. for work. I laid awake for hours, just trying to calm myself down. I woke up the next morning to a phone call from my dad telling me to pack a bag and go stay at my brother's house for a few days. We have cameras, and he said that shortly after I'd gotten home the night before, the cameras went off, but he didn't check it because he figured I was going down to my car to grab something really quickly. The camera footage showed a man lurking around my house. And what's scarier is he stayed around until my dad got up to go to work, left, and when my dad left for work, he came back and just stood at the bottom of the stairs, waiting. A neighbor happened to see him, and the police were called. He ended up getting caught and he went to jail, but he just got out. I'm terrified, and I feel the constant need to look over my shoulder and make sure he's not there. Side note, my mum passed away in September 2021. I will always believe that the feeling I got in the beginning was a warning sign from her. It helps me to believe that she's still watching over and protecting me.
I have been working for a few different modeling agencies since I was about 8 or 9. I did a few commercials for clothing when I was still a kid. I still do the occasional one as a side project, and I'm now in my 20s and a junior in university at Arizona State University. I took a big step back from it after I enrolled to better focus on school, but as I mentioned, I still do the odd shoot, mostly to help with my ever-growing student debt, which always feels like a massive weight on my shoulders. I didn't receive any scholarships or other bursaries, so the financial strain is real. I am the type of student that really needs to focus to spend more time than the rest just to pull off decent grades. I wish that weren't the case. But it's the reality of who I am. Because of this, I can't afford to work a small job on the side to help with the expenses. This is why small photo shoots on the side when my school's agenda doesn't get in the way works perfectly. It's half-decent money for a few hours of my time. I'm not implying in the slightest that I'm raking in cash. If anything, it just helps pay for my books and food, and I work steadily in the summer months to help pay for my tuition. And I'm extremely grateful that my parents put together what money they could afford into the savings account for my rent for the year. I have always been comfortable in my own skin, fortunately. I have enough confidence in my appearance that even when I gain or lose a few pounds, I'm okay to show a bit of skin in these shoots. After they're published and released, wherever my agency sends them to, I'm given the green light to post them on my various social media platforms. I'm usually very proud of my work, so why not share them on Instagram for my family and friends to see? As many other women can attest to, posting any photos that are even the slightest bit revealing is a one-way ticket to receive crude and unwanted messages, either public on the feed or in my DMs. I've always just ignored these because they're almost always disgusting. In my second year, I decided to get a place off campus with one of my childhood friends, Julie, who also attends ASU. That made the transition and moving away from home for the first time much easier on both of us. We had a similar schedule, so even our routine was great. The only difference was her Fridays, where she'd often go back home to visit family. I didn't have this luxury with a full day of classes up until 6 Friday evening. Most times, I'd either spend the weekend at our little place by myself and just catch up on school, or go to the occasional party. I had a pretty large sociology lecture every Thursday, one of the classes that I always seemed to struggle with. I'd often join study groups with some girlfriends that I had just started to get to know over the last couple weeks, and they were all welcoming to their already established core. I remember going home one late night after a lecture and just sitting in bed. Julie had already gone back home, so I had the place to myself. I honestly didn't mind. Occasionally, if I got lonely, I'd head out and meet up with some of my other girlfriends or have them come by my place. I was absolutely exhausted for some reason, so I decided to just lay in bed, watch a movie, and just check Instagram and Twitter. I noticed that I had a notification that one of the girls from my study group just started following me on Instagram, so naturally, I followed her back. I didn't know her as well as some of the others in the group, but whenever we did talk, she always seemed really kind, and no more than 2 or 3 minutes passed when I noticed that she liked all of my modeling shots. I didn't think anything of it. I'm all for being supportive, so I probably would do the same for a close friend as well. Later that night, I got a DM from her asking what I was up to. It seemed pretty vague. Maybe she was a little more socially awkward than I initially thought. Oh well, she's got to be harmless. We sent a few messages back and forth that night before I fell asleep. Friday was my busiest day, and I knew that I had a paper to be submitted the following week that I admittedly hadn't started. I planned to grab food on the way home and just spend the weekend to myself writing. Our off-campus home isn't too big. It's a decent-sized 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom townhouse. The street was very close to the campus on this really quiet dead-end street. I grabbed a bag of the king of all snacks, spicy Doritos, and set up shop on my bed upstairs with my MacBook and papers scattered everywhere while I tried to get a head start on my paper. I'm not the greatest at staying focused, and oftentimes catch myself picking up my phone while I'm in class, or in this case, avoiding a few textbooks that I should be reading. I noticed I had an abundance of messages from the girl from my study group, all small talk, asking what I was up to, plans for the night and the weekend, and etc. I explained that I was working on my psychology paper and that I would be glued to my computer for the weekend. She seemed to avoid that statement and asked if I wanted to hang out that night. I repeated myself and then just tossed my phone on the bed beside me and continued to work until it was relatively late. I remember having to call it quits because I was absolutely beat. I would probably do more harm than good to my paper if I continued to write that night, so I decided to pack it in. I remember tossing on a movie and eventually falling asleep. But I woke up abruptly to the neighbor's dog barking sometime in the middle of the night. I laid there for a moment or two and eventually fell back asleep. I'm not exactly sure how long I fell asleep before waking up again, and I don't think it was much longer than 10 or 15 minutes. However, I have no idea why I woke up. I laid in bed, facing my wall away from the doorway and window, and this is when I heard someone clear their throat, almost like they tried to do it under their breath and be silent. I was utterly mortified. I didn't even know how to react. I remember not being able to even move my legs or arms because I didn't know where they were, and I didn't want to draw any attention to myself. I feel like I laid there motionless for at least an entire minute until I thought of something. I figured that I could fake a phone call stating that I was going to grab something from downstairs and then I'd head back up to the bed. This might have been a stupid idea, but I couldn't think of anything else. So that's exactly what I did. When I reached to the top of the stairs near the end of the hallway, I started sprinting to the door, grabbed my car keys, and then took off. I drove down the street where I called the police, and they came by to search the house. No one was found inside. They did say that the sliding door to the backyard was slightly open, but that was it. I decided to sleep in my car that night, not a chance that I felt comfortable going back in there that night. I kept tossing and turning, laying in my driver's seat, and at this point, the sun was just starting to come up. I grabbed my phone to kill some time until it was bright enough that I'd feel safe walking into my place again. I saw that this girl had messaged me numerous times again, all after that I had expressed that I couldn't hang out and that I was busy with my psych paper. The last message from her was that she was coming over. That was at 3 a.m. This woman, who I don't really know, actually came into my house after 3 in the morning. I was absolutely fuming at this point. I messaged her calling her out, explained that I called the police and etc. Any fear turned into anger at this point. I messaged one of the girls from our study group to vent to her about it. I spent 15 or so uninterrupted minutes just swearing and explaining how livid I was. And not only that, how weird was it for her to do that in the first place? The girl mentioned she was actually getting together with her at the library later that morning, and that I could meet them there if I'd like. I agreed, but also obliged to keep it somewhat civil. As soon as I got there, I could tell something was off. She approached me before I could even get a word out. She just hugged me and asked if I was okay, before I even began to start expressing how I was feeling. She explained that her phone was stolen 3 days prior from somewhere on the campus. A wave of nausea just hit me. I hadn't even been talking to this girl through Instagram. It was some complete stranger posing as her. I could barely comprehend the situation. I was horrified. I returned home and noticed that the next door neighbor was out watering his garden. He came up to me and asked if I was okay. Again, more confusion set in. He then explained that he heard his dog barking pretty aggressively last night. When he looked outside, he could see this thin middle-aged man standing in my backyard. However, he didn't know who he was. It could have been a family member of mine for all he knew, so he didn't want to call the police over possibly nothing. It wasn't until he saw the flashing lights in my driveway a little while later that it was something much more sinister. He was able to give police a full description of this man, who was eventually caught a few days later roaming around the campus. He still had the stolen phone on him. When it was confiscated, police found dozens of photos of me in it, walking around campus and then eventually walking home from class. That's how this deranged lunatic found out where I lived, and I still have no idea what his intentions were that night. And to be honest, I don't think I want to know. He knew what he was doing. Story by u/MadRockeyWithABox. So today, I, 26 female, had to drive to a military base to get my temporary disabled retired veteran ID. My old base is about 150 miles away, and my husband's base is 80 miles. Those seemed a little far, so I decided to go to a base that was only 35 miles away. Due to where I live, getting anywhere consists of a lot of back roads, and as I got closer to the base, I noticed all the shops in the town. My husband loves to work on models, but our Hobby Lobby near us hadn't had the colors that he needed, so I decided that I'll stop by after I get my ID. I get on base, find the building, and after months of struggling to get things done, I finally got my ID. I left the building overwhelmingly excited because this meant that I had proof of my military insurance for things the VA won't cover. So, I was in a pretty good mood and made a note of a few stores that I might want to check out. I didn't spend too much time in Hobby Lobby. I just grabbed the paints that I needed and then got out. The next thing that happened baffled me. I went to walk across the crosswalk, but noticed this car had sped up, and I didn't want to get hit, so I stopped. He rolls down his window and pulls up right in front of me. Naturally, I took a step back, and he was probably a 30-year-old male, African American, and his first words were, "Is it true that your kind likes dating out of their race?" I'll be honest, I was taken aback. But thank goodness for the military, because I've learned to respond with confidence even when I'm uncertain. So I calmly state, I don't really know. I'm married, so I don't really date. But my husband is half white and half Hispanic, if that helps you. And during this time, I had shifted my keys in between my fingers just in case he made any sudden movements. I hear him continuing to try and talk with me and get me to come closer to the vehicle, but I wasn't listening. I was checking my surroundings. It was a Monday, so most people would still be at work and the place was pretty empty. I said, I gotta go. After I finished speaking, I looked around and thank goodness, there were a few people, and as soon as he realized this, he said, Oh, well, here's my number if you want to continue this conversation. I watched him drive off before I went to my car. So I sent a message to a few friends to let them know where I was and what had happened. And I was also hoping that the guy would just leave. I drive around to find the exit, and I swear that I see the car again. My first thought was, I am not letting him follow me down back roads or follow me home. So I drove the opposite way, back towards the base, because I'm thinking that you need to have a military ID to get on, and if he was following me, I stood a better chance of getting help. Heading towards the base must have scared him off because he turned around and drove off. And just to be sure that I was safe, I went to a sandwich place and ordered food and waited for a little bit just to calm myself back down. It doesn't help that I have depression, anxiety, PTSD, and insomnia, so the whole situation really freaked me out. As I drove home, I realized that the way he drove up when I was crossing the street meant that he was intending to block my path and kind of corner me. I'm happy for all my training, but my anxiety was so bad that I talked to a friend the whole way home. Seriously, be smart out there, people. I'll tell you, I've been trained to fight my whole life, and I know what I have to do, but it worries me to think of what would have happened if he had done that to someone else. Trust your instincts, and if you think you're being followed, find a police station or anywhere with good security. Stay safe, my friends. The Night Bus Stalker, written by Kate. This happened around the summer of 2022 after I met up with two performer friends to rehearse for an upcoming show. I was catching the night bus to get back to the subway station where my car was as I took the train while it was still operating. I was already uneasy as I am a femme-presenting individual. I was born a female, but I had no money to get a taxi or Lyft at that time. The bus finally came around, so I got on, paid the $2 bus fare, and then sat down. The rest of the ride was pretty uneventful as everyone was keeping to themselves. But pretty soon, the bus began to empty out as people got off at their stations, where it was me and this one man who was giving me some weird vibe. I've caught him looking at me a few times out of nowhere during the bus ride, but now he was asleep. I prayed that he would not get off at the same time as me. But unfortunately, that's exactly what happened once we finally got to my stop. When I began walking towards my car, I looked behind me to find the man following me. He was keeping a bit of a distance from me, but I was still paranoid that he was 100% following me. I began to pick up the pace, getting my keys out while also clutching onto a pocket knife that my roommate gave me for protection. And as soon as I reached my car, I jumped right in and immediately locked the doors. The man at this point was able to catch up to me and walked over to the passenger side of my car. But fortunately, I had already locked it so he couldn't get in. Not even bothering to put my seatbelt on, I started my engine and drove out of the parking lot quickly. And once I felt safe enough, I put my seatbelt on and flagged down a member of security for the transportation system. I saw that the man who stalked me was still at the station, so I pointed him out and explained what happened. The security officer looked a bit annoyed, but he wasn't annoyed at me. It was an annoyance like, I can't believe this happened again. He told me that he will take it from here, and I thanked him before driving back to my apartment. A few days later, I bought pepper spray, and ever since that evening, I have never left my apartment without it. I keep it out and ready to be used, and fortunately, I haven't had a repeat of being stalked to my car. It scares me to think though, what would have happened if I didn't lock my doors on time? What would have the stranger done to me? Will he pull out a weapon or try to take advantage of me? This is unfortunately an everyday reality for us femme-presenting individuals. And here are the top comments for my last video. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.